Welcome to Creative Mornings Charlotte. I'm Matt Olin. I'm your host. It is so awesome to have you guys here. How many people are here for the first time ever? Wow! That's amazing. Well, welcome. Our hashtag is Charlotte is Creative. And don't just do it this morning, do it all month long when you see creative things around town. This hat that I'm wearing is the birthday hat of the Olin family. Every time there's a birthday in the Olin family, this hat comes out, and I'm wearing it today because I believe that you all are family as well. So this is a birthday family celebration. Contextomies. I don't know if anyone's heard of contextomies before. But, a contextomy is sort of this idea of misquoting someone, right? Like by shortening the quote or pulling words out of the quote. So let me give you a couple of examples, because this happens in the movies a lot, right? So an ad for the 1995 thriller Seven said, "A small masterpiece." That's what the poster said, a small masterpiece. But in truth, the Entertainment Weekly review that was taken from said, "The credit sequence, with its jumpy frames and near subliminal flashes of psychoparaphernalia, is a small masterpiece of dementia." The movie got a grade B-. So the small masterpiece, we're just talking about the credits. Now, some of you may know I was asked to write a monthly column in the Charlotte Observer, an editorial, if you will, and I'm happy to say I've been getting some really great reviews on these columns. So, for example, one person said, "Literary talent." It was really heartwarming to see that. Actually, he said, "A wasted article. The Observer is desperate again for any article disparaging the press, and Mr. Olin needs to rethink his literary talents badly." So I confess, I may have done a little contextomy there. It is so easy to take things out of context, and I think that's one of the reasons why we gather together here every month, is because when we're behind our screens commenting at each other, it's really easy to take each other out of context. But when we're in the same room together having conversations, face to face, it's a lot harder to take each other out of context. So I think that face-to-face connections is one of the reasons we're doing this, and it's all baked into our manifesto. Another reason we're doing this is for the hugs and high fives. We love the hugs and high fives. And we're about to give away some more HUD Grants. Come on up, Tim.
We have 5 that I'm happy to give away now. The first is to Off-Broadway Theater for their production of 3 Days of Rain. The second is to Analog Luxury. The third is to our very own Kevin Washington. Then we have one with Elenia Arenas for a art exhibition that she is going to be working on in Charlotte. And then the fifth is Learn to Ride, which is a program that is going to teach kids teaches kids to ride a bike.
The global shout-outs that we do are sponsored by our dear partner, Providence Day. Providence Day School is a perfect sponsor for that segment, because they are the global school in Charlotte. Buenos dias, Lima. Have a creative morning. Here we go.
Buenos dias, Lima. Have a creative morning.
Thank you to our sponsors. So much creativity to support in this town. One of our favorite traditions at Creative Mornings is to share with you a local musician or band who's going to play some stuff that they've been working on. And of course, this morning is no exception. So I'd like to bring to the stage this incredible young talent. Goes to Alexander Graham, 12 years old this month. Please welcome to the Charlotte Star Room music stage, Lane Mansfield, everybody. Come on up, Lane.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. The baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty and the moonlight overthrew ya. She tied you to the kitchen chair, she broke your throat, she cut your hair.
Peru. She lived in the U.S. since 1974. In 2010, after an accomplished business career, Violeta entered the nonprofit sector, and she is now the executive director of LAWA, which stands for Latin Americans Working for Achievement, formerly the Latin American Women's Association. LAWA is a nonprofit organization that supports the educational advancement of Latinos in the Charlotte region. And I'm going to leave it at that because her story is important. It's incredibly engaging, and it's so relevant to our global theme of context today. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage to speak to us on context, Charlotte's own Violeta Moser. Come on up. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you,
Are you good here? Is this good?
I think I'm good here, yes. My goodness, buenos dias. Buenos dias. I didn't know that I was going to follow all this energy. So here I am with these wonderful people around me, and I am a little nervous, but I will do my best to deliver something about context. So in preparing for this speech about context, since English is my second language, I had to really check because I was having a little trouble relating as to how my 43 years journey from Lima, Peru, to Charlotte, North Carolina, was going to give context to who I am and what I do now. So to give you this little context, I will share my story of my early life. I will bore you with that after all this excitement. My arrival to the US, and my work currently with students, some DACA students, and the work that my small nonprofit does. So it seemed to be appropriate that with the events that have occurred in the last year or so, that we needed to address the fears, dreams, but also those issues that are affecting the Latino community, not only in Charlotte, but all over the country. So to give you a context about this, I will tell you a little bit of me, and I will transport you to Lima, Peru, where I was born. So in Peru, one day in October, about 1968, I woke up just like every day, ready to go to school. And as I'm getting ready, I realized that I couldn't leave my house. My world had literally changed overnight. So I was then a 13-year-old high school girl. My world were my friends, my family. About that time, the Beatles, Rolling Stones maybe, and then some Latin singers like Julio Iglesias. My world was dreaming to get an education. That's how my parents raised me. My dream was one day to become a lawyer, one day to perhaps represent my country as an ambassador someplace. So those were my dreams. I wanted to travel and see the world. I wanted to see the wonders of the US, the United States, that I read in my magazines. I was learning English. You know, I wanted to learn more about the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps was doing work in my country around that time, helping people live in better communities. And I'm sure many of you and all of you have heard about the Peace Corps work. I was a very good student in school. My parents, again, raised me to let me know that that was the best tool in life, my education. So I was also studying English, so one day I can travel the world. So yes, my world was this perfect place for a teenager. But that day in October, when a general of the armed forces deposed the president through a coup d'etat, led all this military positioning or occupation of the city where I was born. Social and economic chaos followed, For about 7 years period, my environment had become dangerous and the city was in total chaos. About that time, gathering of 3 people was prohibited, of more than 3 people, I'm sorry. There was curfew, and we all needed to be home by 8:00 p.m. Imagine that for a life of a person living in a city. Lima is at that time was a city of about 9 million people. It was hard to get the very basic stuff, such as food. There were long lines to get oil, bread, the very basics. Electricity and water were scarce. At the same time, strikes and people becoming angry about the government were beginning to form strikes, and public workers were no longer picking up the garbage on the streets. So the smell in the city of garbage, 9 million people around the city, was really creating a smell and odor that I remember still now. Students spent more time at home because of safety. The streets were not safe than going to school. At that time, my father was working with the Peace Corps, who were doing engineering work to bring water to the remote areas of the Andean regions. They were building bridges and hydroelectrical plants. My father tried to continue the work of this Peace Corps individuals, engineers, after the government sent all American companies home. The general of the army, president, said, "Americans go home, Yankees go home." So one of the best memories about my father is about him trying to continue this work and creating festivals to raise money to continue helping the people in the villages. Perhaps the greatest memory of my father that stayed with me is what has made me who I am now. It stays with me, and it would transform my life, not knowing at that time on what I do now. So that's a context of around that time and my environment around me. So in spite of all this chaos, life went on. And one day, one Sunday morning, my mother and I went to visit an old friend. A cousin of mine had arrived from the US. And when we began to talk, she told me about these wonderful things occurring in her life. She had gone to school, gotten a degree, and gotten this great job. And as I told you, I always wanted to travel the world, and I dreamt about maybe going to the US. I have nearly mastered English. I was studying, and I thought I knew English. And I wanted to be where cool people like you, hip, that was the new word, right? Hip people like Tim and all these great volunteers here are. And I wanted to learn more about the American culture. I wanted to actually learn who really was JFK and who killed him. I wanted to know about Nixon, and truly, really, why is that around the time that Yankees went home, all this chaotic uproar that was caused in the city with food shortages and the Peace Corps people living unfinished projects was related to all of this. So a few months later, my dream came true. My cousin and I took off and landed in New York City, 1 August 1974. I wanted to come to the US to get an education and perhaps go back home and still continue my dream of becoming a lawyer and maybe even an ambassador still. So it was tough at first when I arrived to the US. All this wonderful English that I had learned was not exactly like the books had said. I had to relearn English, and I had to adjust very quickly to the culture. But I received help from many people like you. In particular, one person Juan Ruiz was my counselor at college. And with his guidance, I was able to get a scholarship that allowed me to finish and complete my college education. He was a tremendous influence in my life. So as I finished school, my career started almost immediately because I wanted to save money to go back home. But around that time, I had met the man who is now my husband for 40 years, Robert Moser. So after a few career moves, starting our jobs and the birth of our first daughter, we came to North Carolina in about year 1983. While living in Greenville, North Carolina, as I was driving to school, I will never forget this. I saw this line of people almost marching to work, and they looked very much like me. I encountered migrant workers. These were families and very young people, I would almost say children, going to work. This was the first time my heart felt this jolt about what truly immigration, immigrants, and migrant workers were. To put their stories into a context, I could understand. I saw their journey, and I knew it. This was the start of what would be later my new career. So in a span of 14 years in the corporate world and leading a small marketing research company, I found myself spending more time doing volunteer work here in Charlotte and understanding the diverse Hispanic community that I encountered. I had spent most of my time studying and getting married and having a baby, and suddenly here I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, with really a diverse population of Latin Americans or Latinos. It's the first time in my life that I was understanding what a Hispanic meant. I had no idea. There's no translation of Hispanic into Spanish, really. We accommodated to be Hispano, but you know, when I go home and I say, Mama, I'm Hispana, what is that? So there's no Hispana. So I was learning that. I was hearing stories of the people through the work with my community boards and committees of the challenges of many immigrant families that arrive here. They were sharing stories about their children and how tough it is for them to find education and how they came to this country with a dream of an education. Very much like my dream of getting an education, so I could relate. But these families had a whole lot more. I was very close to my identity. I knew where I was coming from, and I noticed these families because of how they crossed the border and the conditions and situations and the rural areas where they came from did not seem to pass on that identity to their children, so the children were struggling in school, finding that identity. So as I was doing this work one day, back then the superintendent of the schools, CMS schools, approached a group of Latinos, some of us who were leading and walking around serving in committees, and asked us for help for the newly arrived families of immigrants. They were having a hard time understanding the school system. They were asking us why it is that families do not participate in school. So back then, my work with LAWA became more active, and I began to serve in this organization that I understood needed to be transformed in order to be able to address these issues. As a Latino community grew, these challenges became even greater. So the call for help was right there, and someone had to do something about it. So together with the support of many people, everyday people, we began to change LAWA and created programs for students at elementary school, tutoring programs for particularly English as a second language ESL students. We also included the parents. We needed to find alternative ways to teach Latinos whose language is English as a second language. So as we did that, we also realized this identity lacking in students. And with that, we created a program that some of you may have heard is called Dancing for Diversity. Dancing for Diversity was a way to connect children with dances of native countries, modern and old, salsa, bachata, and those things that you may have heard. So the idea was to bring in culture through a fun event and invite their peers to avoid what we called bullying, because at that time people were not knowing, were not understanding of cultures. We also wanted to increase social capital by bringing people of different backgrounds together. So, in addition to tutoring and the parenting component, we had Dancing for Diversity. Many of these students grew up to become what we know now dreamers. In 2012, when President Obama signed the executive order called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, to provide temporary legal protection and status for children, the dreams of thousands of young people ignited again. So DACA gave young people new hope and motivation to keep moving forward. They came out of the dark, became more visible, began to get empowered, and went to school. And they continued to go to school and became professionals, many amongst us probably in this group. There are approximately 800,000 DACA students in this country, about 48,000 in North Carolina. Most DACA status people receive a full education, but they're still considered not eligible for certain jobs. Their driver's licenses are marked with a red mark that indicates their temporary status. So I've worked with a lot of dreamers, but I will tell you one story, only one story, to illustrate the challenges. So I met this very young girl in high school, little short, petite woman from Mexican, she was born in Mexico. When I first met her, her voice was so soft and it always seemed to be hiding, almost to make herself invisible. But as soon as DACA came about, her voice and her transformation was amazing. Her voice became louder and she found opportunities and took those opportunities to continue her career. A couple of years later, she is now studying to become a physician's assistant. She wants to heal people. Her own heals, her own experiences when crossing the border is what she's also trying to heal. So, what is the real impact of DACA? Since the beginning of the presidential elections in 2016, last year, immigration and DACA have been used as platforms to advance political interests, as we know. The harsh rhetoric used against immigration and immigrant families has created despair and fear in many communities. Since that time, LAWA has tracked behavioral changes. People are hiding, they are in fear. They are afraid of deportation. Many have actually gone home in fear of that. At one CMS school, you probably heard it in the news, 70% of students were absent the day after the elections. 70%. So this country, founded by immigrants, is now trying to shut down its door to immigrants. Why do we do this? I don't understand. What is our problem? Are we afraid of the browning of our skin? Or why do we want to lose the investment that we made in this wonderful young people that are more Americans than where we came from? So as now the future of DACA and the 800,000 DACA eligible individuals in this country is unclear. Since the new president took office, he has proposed a process that could slowly end DACA. In the meantime, while the final decision is still pending, the uncertainty of the future of DACA for immigrants and dreamers is on hold. In fear of the worst, as I said, many people have gone home. Others are being deported. A final decision will not be known until early next year. So what's the future? I am an optimist. I think I am. So I believe that the courts and the bodies of government will rule in favor of keeping DACA and propose a path for citizenship for most of DACA-eligible people. Our country will keep very talented people with that. And we hopefully live in a successful, peaceful society. So if the ruling is against DACA, we will still continue to see children, students that are going back into hiding. We'll still see the challenges in our schools. So one way or another, the work of organizations, many in Charlotte, like LAWA, remains critical to continue providing support to students. Like students like Rose in my story. There were many more students in addition to DACA students. So how can we help, and what can you do, all of you? LAWA needs tutors to tutor these little kids at elementary school. We need mentors to guide students like my counselor back many years ago did for me, to help him sail through the system, to gain skills, to go to technical schools, to maybe learn a trade. We also need financial support for scholarships and to continue dancing for diversity to stimulate our children. So if you are able and willing to share your time to do this tutoring and mentoring, I would really appreciate it. We also, if you like to share your treasure, we're welcome also to that. Please contact me at lawanc.org. So thank you for listening. I hope I have given you a context and I've taken you all the way around like I feel my life has been. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Violeta Moser, everybody, Violeta Moser. Thank you, Violeta.
Thank you.
Lima, Peru, native daughter, but she's ours now. Next month, we're gathering here on January 5th, and we're kicking off our third year with the theme, Anxiety. Happy birthday, Charlotte. We love you guys, and we'll see you next month. Woo!